Irma Grese, the Hyena of Auschwitz. She was barely 22 years old when she met the hangman's noose, yet her name would become synonymous with unimaginable cruelty. Standing just over 5 feet tall with platinum blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, Irma Grese appeared to embody the Nazi ideal of Aryan beauty. But beneath this carefully cultivated exterior lurked something far more sinister, a capacity for sadistic violence that would earn her the chilling moniker, the Hyena of Auschwitz. How does an ordinary farm girl from rural Germany transform into one of history's most notorious war criminals? The answer lies in a disturbing journey through the darkest chapters of human nature. Born on October 7, 1923, in the small village of Reken, Mecklenburg, Irma Ida Ilse Grese entered the world as the third of 5 children in a working-class family. Her father, Alfred, was a farmhand with violent tendencies and fervent Nazi sympathies who would later abandon his family. Her mother, Berta, struggled with depression and the burden of raising 5 children in poverty. The household was marked by domestic violence, neglect, and the toxic ideology that was sweeping across Germany. At 14, Grese left school and bounced between various jobs, working on farms, in a shop, and briefly as a nurse's aide. But it was her enrollment in the League of German Girls, Bund Deutscher Mädel, the female branch of the Hitler Youth, that began her indoctrination into Nazi ideology. Here, she absorbed the propaganda about racial superiority and the supposed threat posed by Jews and other undesirable populations. In 1942, at just 18 years old, Grese volunteered for concentration camp service, a decision that would seal her fate and the fate of countless victims. She was assigned to Ravensbrück, the largest concentration camp for women in the German Reich, where she began her apprenticeship in systematic brutality. Ravensbrück served as Grese's finishing school in cruelty. Under the tutelage of experienced guards like Dorothea Binz, she learned the mechanics of dehumanization and torture. The camp's atmosphere was deliberately designed to strip away any vestige of human empathy. Guards were encouraged to view prisoners not as people, but as subhuman enemies of the Reich. Grese proved to be an eager student. She quickly gained a reputation for her vicious beatings, her delight in setting dogs on prisoners, and her particular cruelty toward Jewish women and children. Her supervisors noted her enthusiasm for the work, a euphemism that barely concealed the sadistic pleasure she derived from inflicting pain. But Ravensbrück was merely preparation for the horror that awaited at Auschwitz-Birkenau. In March 1943, Grese was transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest and most notorious of the Nazi extermination camps. Here, surrounded by the machinery of industrial murder, she would reach new depths of depravity that would earn her a place in the pantheon of Nazi war criminals. As an Oberaufseherin, senior overseer, Grese commanded a staff of guards responsible for female prisoners in the camp. But what set her apart was not just her rank. It was her unprecedented cruelty and the apparent joy she took in tormenting her victims. Survivors' testimonies paint a portrait of a woman who had completely abandoned her humanity. She carried a pistol, a whip, and wore heavy boots that she used to kick prisoners. Her signature weapon was a plated whip that she wielded with practiced precision. But perhaps most terrifying was her unpredictability. She could appear calm one moment and erupt into violent rage the next, beating prisoners to death for the slightest perceived infraction, or sometimes for no reason at all. Grese developed a particular obsession with young, attractive female prisoners. Survivors testified that she would single out beautiful women for special torment, as if their very existence challenged her own sense of superiority. She was known to force prisoners to strip naked in freezing weather, to stand for hours in painful positions, and to perform humiliating acts for her amusement. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn, one that reveals the true depth of Grese's moral corruption. At Auschwitz-Birkenau, Grese played an active role in the selection process, the horrific procedure by which arriving prisoners were divided into those deemed fit for work and those sent immediately to the gas chambers. With a casual gesture of her finger, she could send hundreds of people to their deaths. Survivors recalled her standing at the ramp, immaculately dressed in her crisp uniform, making life and death decisions with the detached air of someone choosing produce at a market. What made her participation in selections particularly chilling was the pleasure she seemed to derive from the power over life and death. She would often toy with prisoners' hopes, pretending to consider sparing someone before ultimately condemning them. This psychological torture was perhaps even more cruel than physical violence, the deliberate destruction of hope in those final moments before death. Grese also participated in medical experiments, working alongside the camp's doctors in procedures that violated every principle of medical ethics. She showed particular interest in sterilization experiments on young women, viewing them not as human beings deserving of dignity and care, but as test subjects for her twisted curiosity. Within the brutal hierarchy of Auschwitz-Birkenau, Grese occupied a unique position. At just 20 years old, she wielded enormous power over thousands of prisoners. Her youth made her cruelty all the more shocking. Here was someone who should have been in the prime of her compassionate, empathetic years, yet she had become a predator of unprecedented viciousness. Other guards looked up to her as a model of efficiency and ruthlessness. She mentored newer guards in the techniques of psychological and physical torture, passing on her expertise in breaking the human spirit. The Nazi system had created in Grese not just a participant in genocide, but an innovator and teacher of cruelty. Her relationship with male SS officers was complex and manipulative. She understood that her appearance and sexuality could be weapons in their own right, and she used both to advance her position within the camp hierarchy. Several officers became infatuated with her, providing her with additional protection and privileges that she used to further torment prisoners. When the Soviet Army liberated Auschwitz in January 1945, Grese was no longer there. She had been transferred back to Ravensbrück and then to Bergen-Belsen, where she continued her reign of terror until the very end of the war. At Bergen-Belsen, conditions were even more horrific than at Auschwitz. Overcrowding, disease, and starvation created a hellscape that shocked even hardened British soldiers when they liberated the camp in April 1945. It was at Bergen-Belsen that Grese was finally captured by British forces. Initially, she attempted to blend in with other prisoners, claiming to be a victim rather than a perpetrator. But her deception was quickly exposed by survivors who recognized her immediately and testified to her crimes. The woman who had wielded absolute power over life and death just days before was now a prisoner herself, facing the justice she had denied to so many others. The Belsen trial, officially known as the trial of Josef Kramer and 44 others, began in September 1945 before a British military tribunal. Grese was among the most prominent defendants, charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity. The trial was groundbreaking in several ways. It was one of the first major war crimes trials, predating even Nuremberg, and it marked the first time that the full horror of the Nazi concentration camp system was exposed to the world. Survivor after survivor took the stand to testify against Grese. Their testimonies painted a picture of systematic brutality that shocked even experienced prosecutors and judges. Helena Koper, a Polish survivor, testified about watching Grese beat a young girl to death with a walking stick. Hanke Rosenweig described how Grese would set her trained German shepherd on prisoners for sport. Throughout the trial, Grese maintained an attitude of defiance and contempt. She showed no remorse for her actions and continued to express loyalty to Nazi ideology. When questioned about specific atrocities, she either denied involvement or claimed she was simply following orders, the defense that would become infamous in subsequent war crimes trials. And here comes the moment that would seal her place in history, a final act that would demonstrate the complete absence of redemption in her character. On December 13, 1945, Irma Grese was found guilty of war crimes and sentenced to death by hanging. She was just 22 years old. Even facing execution, she showed no remorse or recognition of the enormity of her crimes. According to witnesses, her final words before the execution were a defiant "Schnell," quickly, as if she were still giving orders rather than facing justice for her actions. On December 13, 1945, at Hamlin Prison, Irma Grese became one of the first Nazi war criminals to be executed by the Allies. She walked to the gallows with the same cold composure that had characterized her time as a concentration camp guard. At the age of 22, the woman who had destroyed thousands of lives met her end. The story of Irma Grese serves as a chilling reminder of how ordinary people can become instruments of extraordinary evil. She was not born a monster. She was created by a system that rewarded cruelty, dehumanized its victims, and provided ideological justification for the worst impulses of human nature. Her case raises uncomfortable questions that continue to resonate today. How do we recognize and resist the conditions that can transform regular citizens into perpetrators of genocide? What responsibility do individuals bear when they participate in systematic evil, regardless of the orders they receive or the society that shapes them? The testimony of survivors ensures that Grese's crimes will not be forgotten, but their testimonies also bear witness to the incredible resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable cruelty. In remembering the Hyena of Auschwitz, we honor not just the victims of her brutality, but all those who survived to tell their stories and ensure that such horrors are never repeated. The young woman who once held the power of life and death over thousands died alone on a gallows, her name forever associated with humanity's darkest chapter. In the end, history's judgment proved more enduring than Nazi ideology. Irma Grese is remembered not as the Aryan ideal she thought herself to be, but as a cautionary tale of how easily civilization can collapse into barbarism when we forget our fundamental humanity.